What we're doing in this section is we have really tried to boil this down into the practical and the hands-on. Right? There's a lot of ways you can do these things, but we thought that we should emphasize what works in marriage. We've been married for 37 years, but we've done ministry for a long time. I counted up last night, about 43 years. And a lot of that involves helping people in troubled relationships, just as pastors, and then passing on the ones that were over our heads to the counselors. But we've picked up a lot of different things. Not only has worked in our relationship, but have worked for believers. And so that's the whole point of the handout that you have. And we're going to try to do is we're going to try to go through as many of these 25 suggestions these are the 25 tried and true that seem to work for us. And if you want more detail, our new book from InterVarsity is actually being debuted here at the conference. So this is its first public appearance. They got it ready for the conference. And what we've tried to do here is, this is an experiment. This is a dialogue between ourselves and the Tracys. Some of you may know Steve and Celestia Tracy from Mending the Soul Ministries. They are soft complementarians, but definitely wonderful people who love each other. And we as egalitarians, this all grew from a evangelical theological conference, society conference, which Mimi recruited us for, to do a dialogue. We hit it off so well that we decided, well, InterVarsity invited us to do this book. And what it basically is we're trying to build what's common in Christian marriage. What unifies us across the board between complementarians and egalitarians? Where do we disagree? First, where do we agree? And then where do we disagree? So it can be ironic dialogue, not to compromise either side, but to discover the commonalities as well as the differences. So if you're interested, it's available at the book table. And then our latest issue of Priscilla Papers, with this absolutely adorable cover, which is John Lommel, who's the dean of the Alaska Bible College. So could not come down from Alaska to be here, but he's a wonderful egalitarian. This is a delightful family. His wife took the picture, and the whole issue is delightful from end to end. So that's what we have on marriage. All right, so you have their sheets. If you've just joined us, there are sheets by the doors, and we're going to plow right in. We've actually got each section timed. We're going to stop somewhere in the middle for all your comments or reactions that you want to give. And then, like I say, we'll just do as many of these as we can. All right, so we're going to start, first of all, where we decided if you don't fix the basics first, then all the rest of the sheets aren't going to work. All right, so these are the foundational things. And the first one is marry the right person. Let me tell you, we have come over the years to emphasize this absolutely first. Marry the right person. For instance, don't marry someone who's abusive. Now, understanding, as we all know, nobody you marry will be perfect. You're going to change somewhat as you encourage each other for the good. But some people really do have overwhelming problems that they may not want to abandon. So don't rush into it. Because so many times that's what we're really dealing with. It was a mistake from the beginning. So that's our first preliminary statement.
Okay, the second point is don't get involved in substance abuse or lead to many unwise decisions. And what it is that we actually took this sheet and we did a study in our church where we went through the points little by little, and you'll see some are in bold, some are not in bold, and the ones in bold were the ones we opened up and we used as part of our discussion. And we had a couple where the guy was, I don't know, was it heroin or anyway, some major drug he was taking. Finally, his wife was able to bring him in, and he was like this the whole time during the session, and we realized he couldn't hear. And she couldn't really go on to higher steps till we were able to get him finally to a program, and then once he went through, it was a teen challenge program in his case. He did at least a certain portion of it. He came back, and then at that point, he was able to concentrate on their relationship. So in other words, if someone, or else I think another case where I think Bill did premarital counseling, but then they had been both involved in substance abuse. They got back into it, and they were all right for 9 months, but once they got back into the substance abuse, these finer points didn't make any difference. So in other words, you have to deal with that basic thing first to get a person over and out of this other, like I see it as like a worm that, is inside you just growing. You got to get it out and release it before you can get on to something else.
Next one seems like a no-brainer. If it was a no-brainer, people wouldn't be doing this all the time. It's don't marry a non-Christian, because foundational to your success is choosing to have a biblical foundation for your marriage. It just seems like, for a Christian, it's the only discrimination that we actually know in the faith. Christians to non-Christians. We don't marry them. That's all that I know of in our discrimination between men and women. Why don't we do that? Because if you're choosing to have a biblical foundation for your marriage, then a sound, godly marriage begins with covenantal principles, which assumes 2 children of the covenant. And both spouses agree on this. It's guiding the choice of whether and whom to marry, what attitudes to adopt when one enters the marriage, how to make a joint decision about how the marriage is structured. In other words, everything foundational is covenantal. This choice helps you set the right orienting perspective toward your marriage. And a lot of what we've had to do over the years is just start from scratch and rebuild in so many homes. All of us adopt a specific worldview in the way we live. We may not be conscious of it, but we're actually operating by one. If we want our marriage to have the best chance to be successful, each partner would do well to choose a conscious, cooperative perspective with which to conduct oneself in the marriage. This is not all guesswork. This is something intentional that begins right at the beginning. It's embedded in your marriage vows. They're very intentional, the marriage vows that we make to one another. We don't actually think these through, but it really is worthwhile doing that. And of course, that begins with choosing a like-minded believer. You have a common coinage in your interchanges, so as to say. Now, suppose you're already married to a non-believer. Maybe you became a believer along the way. Maybe you were deceived. Maybe they changed their mind. Then we move to plan B. All right? And that's 1 Peter 3, 1 through 4 is plan B. Now, we've noticed that what you're up against is tough. It's tough. Non-Christian or weak Christian may actually have the world's mindset towards your marriage. So you're actually speaking different languages here. And sometimes these are, I captured 2 of them for you. I don't know, you can pass this one around. From the back of TV Guide. The world's view of the man. There, what does it say? Some men have a dream. Louis has a family. All right, that's one of them. And then the world's view of women. This one off the front of Newsweek. The new infidelity, from office affairs to internet hookups. More wives are cheating too. The idea of the loose woman. This is something that's pumped into us through the media, continually, off television, from the movies, off the net. Men are supposed to be bored with family. Women are supposed to be promiscuous. And men can use them as a release valve. Very utilitarian and narcissistic. If we're coming from a covenantal perspective, they're coming from an entirely different mindset. We're not even speaking the same language there. So how do you deal with this? Nagging doesn't work. Seen it happen many times, it doesn't work. First of all, bottom line, much prayer. Soak it all in prayer. Exemplary behavior. Befriending by others in the church. There's nothing more powerful than the impact of the Christian community. And then if you can invite them in, assimilation first. We've noticed that in this kind of situation, if they can make Christian friends, especially among other men, and begin to bond up there, then assimilation comes there. But you have to persevere, since this is a slow reorienting of thinking to God's perspective in the Christian worldview. You have to gently reevaluate, and somewhere conversion will happen during that process.
So our 4th point is then as follows: to regularly praise God and study the Bible to learn God's perspective. And think of Colossians 3:16, be thankful, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom with gratitude in your hearts. Sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to God. May seem like an obvious point, but I think it sets you praising the Lord and looking at the Lord for guidance. And then our 5th point is, no matter what people say they believe, that mutual submission and action is what works, because Christ is the head of the family. Remember when we were first married, one gentleman called Bill and I says, I want to speak to the head of the family. Bill said, well, you better start praying. But anyway, both partners must be determined to have God at the center, as you've mentioned already, not the explicit tyranny of the male, nor the implicit tyranny of the female. Those are generalizations, but sometimes true. Both must be willing to serve God together. Mutual submission is putting the other person first, as well as relying on the spouse's strengths. And the Marriage at the Crossroads, Chapter 2, is where we go an in-depth study on the meaning of Ephesians chapter 5, where these are some of the summary points. Love your spouse by doing the best for your spouse, helping your spouse to mature in Christ. So it's a given. We're all going to be immature in Christ, and we're helping each other become more mature. You must be willing to ask God for help together. And sometimes you don't know what to do, to just bend your knees and ask God for help and wait for a reply. Remember that you are now one with another, so make decisions with the other in mind. And sometimes when you're first married, that's hard to figure out. Advocate for one another. Learn to cooperate with, be supportive of, appreciative of, and respectful of your spouse. And I think a great overall verse that orients Ephesians chapter 5 is verse 2, live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. And I don't know if any of you have also read the book Beyond I Do, What Christians Believe About Marriage by Douglas Brower. And in his Appendix B, he includes there a survey, what keeps a marriage going. And he references researchers Jeanette and Robert Lauer interviewed 300 couples who said they were happily married. And they had men and women filled out a questionnaire separately, but it's interesting, their results demonstrate they showed remarkable agreements on the keys to an enduring relationship. And I noticed that the first 7 were identical. They identical priorities for both the men and the women. And these were, my spouse is my best friend, I like my spouse as a person, marriage is a long-term commitment, marriage is sacred, we agree on aims and goals, my spouse has grown more interesting, and I want the relationship to succeed. And then he cites John Gottman, a leading marriage researcher, and he found that husbands who share power and control within their marriage are less likely to divorce than men who resist their wives' influence. When husbands aren't willing to share power in theological terms to practice mutual submission, 81% of those marriages end in divorce. So that's from page 113 of his book. And looking at John Gottman and Nan Silver's own book, 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, he says there, even though he's not a Christian, he says there's no religion I know of that says a man should be a bully. In both kinds of marriages, where he's talking about whether egalitarian or more traditional or hierarchical, emotionally intelligent husbands have figured out the one big thing, how to convey honor and respect. And he says sometimes there are men who consider themselves feminists, but who interact with their wives in ways that belie this label. So just as a secular, studying marriage tells us the importance of honor and respect. So number 6, and as a result, don't settle for society's roles for you. I think every person is individual. Work on your roles with God's help and dialogue with one another. Make your roles as clear as possible, as much as you're able to do so. Choose your roles by spiritual gifts. And in a sense, if you decide to work on your roles rather than accept what you think society wants for you, it's more work. I mean, it's not as easy, but it's more work at the beginning because you have to talk about it, you have to dialogue it, you have to try things, see what works. But in the long run, it works so much better.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think number 7 is absolutely essential. So we don't want to miss this one. That's why we're racing through these, so we can get to the ones that we've put in, and our favorites. This is regularly remember how wonderful your spouse is. we have gratitude is important. I'm going to change this. The gratitude is essential. It's absolutely essential. I think that gratitude is the key to all relationships. And I was thinking about this. I think that lack of gratitude was probably an essential part of what set up the condition for Adam and Eve's sin. We often say, what was the sin at Eden? People say pride was the sin at Eden, wanting to be like God. But I think that was set up by a lack of gratitude, of simply not doing it because they were grateful to all what God asked. We don't want to repeat that in our lives. A good exercise to increase your gratitude is by counting your marital blessings rather than cataloging your gripes. And I think one thing we've seen in our marriage counseling is sometimes you have to cut through this long record of gripes, this catalog that they have for one another. One couple we were about to marry, and we always have this little exercise. Write down, or we usually say, tell us 10 things that you love about your prospective partner. Well, we had one situation. The guy came up with like 15. He was going, he said, that's fine, that's enough. The wife couldn't think of one thing. It got really sticky. Here's So finally we just said, why don't we pause here? Said, why don't you go back, and when you've got 10 things, tell us. So she was riding the bus one day, and she said, I was suddenly overwhelmed. What is wrong with me? You're this wonderful person. She said, then it came flooding in. And then she came back, and she had pages and pages and pages. God called them to a very difficult ministry. They ended up in Eastern Europe going to grad school. I think it was in Poland, and this was years ago. There was a upheaval, had a very strong marriage. They're still together. Their children are grown. They're just going on. So what are we saying here? 1 Corinthians 13:5, right? Love keeps no record of wrongs. There's no way to get rid of the record than to have the attitude of gratitude. So that's to say.
So our 8th point is don't expect your husband or wife to guess how you feel. Tell him or her in a loving way. I mean, how many of us think if he really loves us, he'll be able to figure this out? But he can't. Yeah. If Ephesians 4:25 might be pertinent. It says, so then putting away falsehood, let all of us speak the truth to our neighbors, for we are members of one another. In other words, we all want everyone to sort of intuit what we're really thinking. But, they're not God. And even God in our prayer wants us to express it. So we need to make that step and go ahead and share what we're thinking.
Yeah. Next one, marriage takes a lot of work. You have to work on your relationship. You got to give time to each other, take regular rests and dates, and every once in a while get out of your routines. Aida and I covenanted early on, now this is 37 years in, both of us in active ministry, never to spend more than one night apart. Outside of hospitalizations, which we've had, we've been able to keep that rule. So it seems almost impossible to do with the schedules. You just demand it, and we orient our schedules around that. We also go out every weekend, which for people who are pastoring is difficult to do, but we just built it into the understanding of what the church would do and recommend that to our people. So we built the Sabbath in, because those of you who are in the pastorate know that Sunday is not a day of rest. It'd be a day of rest for everybody else, but it's an enormously busy day for anybody in any aspect of ministry, of church ministry. It's got to be somewhere else, and Monday just may not work. So we've built that in.
And the 10th point is that you need space and time together, and also some alone. So that you're talking about being alone, being together, but there are also times where you need like a little space for yourself. So to keep that balance. Just pause a moment before we move on. We've only done half our points, or less than half. But anyway, does anyone want to have a question or comment so far? Yes?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, this is kind of a two-part question. The complementarian pastor of my church puts, of course, the whole emphasis is on men need to lead their families. They need to be the leader of their wives. And, the emphasis is, that to not dominate on the one hand and not abdicate on the other. So what's a good egalitarian response to that? Part of the practical reason I'm asking that is, in the case of my son and his wife is probably the more gifted in leadership. And I remember the assistant pastor who married them telling me that he was concerned that my son didn't really seem to be ready to move into that traditional role at this time. So I'm looking for a way to help them see marriage outside that traditional complementarian concept. So what's a way to approach that whole issue?
Maybe I'll respond while you're getting the mic. It's interesting because I was just reading, I think it was in Philo. So this goes way back to the Greek times, that there must be one commander. And I think part of that's the idea that you have to have one person in charge for final decisions. But what we figure is this way, is that by our dividing our roles, is that we decide who's ultimately responsible in a certain area. So if it's an emergency, we know this person is in charge. Or if you're child rearing, you decide by time or by gift. You decide, and then when that emergency occurs, it doesn't necessarily have to be the male, but it has to be the person. You've decided your roles by gifts. And then there's some things nobody wants to do, and those you just break off, they're one. So I see it more, the question is it like the metaphor of when you have like a car race, and do you then, let's say the traditional or the hierarchical view is the man's driving the car and the family runs there, changes the tires, puts the gas in, checks the car, and sends a man down. What we do is we all jump out, the whole family. We all take care of part of the car, and then we go on. So I think part of that just has to be, does it really have to be only one person ultimately responsible for everything? Is that really, I don't think that's what the Bible says, and I don't think that is even necessarily the most efficient.
Well, Wayne, since this is a complementarian bit of advice to a son, it's a particularly guy fear and a guy issue. So I would answer it this way. Affirming everything my wife said, which was very wise and helpful, that we actually say all good theology goes back to creation. So I tell my son, we have to go back and look at creation. And this is just true of every I'm a theologian. Every theological question starts at creation. All right, so we look at what was God's original mandate back in the beginning, and that's when I take him right back to Genesis 1 to the joint command, the rule. All right, if you look there, you can start with Genesis 1, 26, 27, 28, all right in there. And the command to rule is given to both men and women together. Then I would take him to Genesis 3 and show him that the imbalance comes as the ramifications of the fall. Now your husband is going to, because you did this, now your husband's going to rule over you. There's going to be an imbalance. And your desire will be for him. And so that's where the imbalance takes place. And then you can couch it in all the rest of the imbalances there. Now it's going to be tough to get things out of the earth. And now you're going to have this continuing battle with evil, crushing the head and being wounded on the heel. In other words, all the imbalances take place. We've been redeemed. And that redemption is all about taking us back to life beyond the curse, which is why my wife put that title for her book, Beyond the Curse. I really do believe we should be living by kingdom values. And kingdom values take us back before the curse. I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow in my men's section. Because so many studies of men, as we'll see, are actually done with the fallen world. And the fall is just taken as, this is the norm. Well, I would tell my son, which I do tell my son, this is not the norm. This is not the way it was supposed to be. Let's figure out what redeemed living looks like. And redeemed living is the joint command of the rule. And while we're on this topic, let me shoot down to the next one, number 11 here. Don't let your mind be filled with unhealthy negative influences, whether from the world or even the Christian culture. Yeah, the world's full of contradictory information and opinions. Now, I sent around two things, one from Newsweek and the other one from TV Guide, right? Now, I just hit on the latest issues of this little local periodical that comes out, I hit 2 jokes. Now, these are 2 issues apart, and I thought I'd just tell you these. The first one. One day, 3 men were walking along and came upon a raging, violent river. They needed to get to the other side, but couldn't figure out how to cross it. First man prayed to God, saying, "Please, God, give me the strength, courage, and ability to cross the river." Poof! God gave him big arms and strong legs, and he was able to swim across the river in about 2 hours. Seeing this, the second man prayed to God, saying, "Please, God, give me the strength, courage, and ability to cross this river." Poof! God gave him the skill to chop down a tree and fashion it into a rowboat. He was able to row across the river in about 3 hours. Third man, seeing how this worked out for the other 2, so he prayed to God, "Please, God, give me the strength, courage, and ability to cross this river." Poof! God turned him into a woman. He walked across the bridge. Joke number 1. 2 issues later, joke number 2. Yesterday, scientists in the United States revealed that beer contains small traces of female hormones. To prove their theory, they fed 100 men 12 pints of beer and observed that 100% of them started talking nonsense and couldn't drive. Hi. You know, it's the same periodical, 2 issues apart. What's the common denominator? Belittling, deprecatory humor. You know? It's derogatory. And I've noticed Christian humor isn't much better. I grew up in a church hearing all these derogatory jokes aimed at spouses, like the famous kiss joke for ministers. You all know that one? Yeah. One of the parishioners sees the sermon, the sermon manuscript, and on the top is written "kiss" by the minister's wife. He said, "Oh, isn't that sweet? She always writes 'kiss' before you go up into the pulpit." He says, "Yeah, it stands for keep it short, stupid." Yeah, you've heard that one. I heard that in church. All right, weight jokes. Spouse ball and chain jokes. My job in our church for 20 years has been pastor of encouragement. And that means that I oversee church discipline. And one of the things that we forbid in the church is put down humor. I work very hard to remove this, to get it entirely. It has no place in the church. It has no place in the home. I think if we were all to take out all the derogatory humor in our churches, you would find that the entire attitude of the place is different. People's guards would drop. There'd be less fear and more bonding. And the same thing for all the statistics about marriages failing. You know, the whole point of the Christian marriage is, though 1,000 may fall at our side, ours is supposed to be a different experience. Yours doesn't have to fall. So what I would say is, don't fill your mind with society and Christian culture's doom and gloom. Fill it with hope and trust in God Almighty. We're trusting God for our salvation. Why can't we trust God for the preservation and the prospering of our marriage? And we're thanking God for the 2 wonderful people that God created between us. So I think that's a bottom line. And while we're talking about that, number 12, don't let vulgar or indecent jokes or reading or visual materials replace an attitude of thanksgiving of your spouse that God has given you. The cardinal example of this, of course, could not have this section without mentioning pornography, because it is absolutely killing us. It's killing us. It's destroying gratitude to spouses, degenerates love and true sexual passion into exploitative lust. It's a kind of virtual adultery. It heaps guilt on those who view it. It grieves the God who gave us sex as a delightful and fulfilling expression of the covenant of marital love. No Christian who I know, and I've talked to so many guys, especially at the seminary, among my seminary students, ones who have come in with this problem, or guys in the church. No Christian I know who's in bondage to pornography is happy. None of them are fulfilled. They're all guilt-ridden, and they're miserable. You know, you might as well just pull out all your fingernails with a pair of pliers and then start on the other hand, rather than to use those fingers to punch this up on the net. It is a loser's game. It's a heavy burden and an oppressive yoke. Jesus' burden is supposed to be easy. His yoke is light. This is heavy, heavy burden, oppressive yoke. It's exactly what we came to Christ to be alleviated from. And I think if we can put it in that perspective, then we can just see it before it just kills us completely. And whatever it takes to do that, and whether it's every net nanny and cyber patrol and everything you can put on your computer or put it out in front, there's plenty of suggestions. And there's some good material on this, too. But we just have to get it in place in our families and train up our children correctly, and train up ourselves, and train up our parishioners, train up our friends.
And then number 13, do not physically harm your wife or husband. I mean, it seems rather obvious, but that's why we have these different ministries with so many helps now. And absolutely crucial. Goes back to the point of respecting your spouse, huh?
Yeah, and we had to put 14 in, just because, you know, we put down humor. Now we're going to say that humor is important. Laughing together at your problems instead of letting yourself be irritated by your spouse. But develop the idea that these differences are endearing traits. So because we don't allow put-down humor doesn't mean we don't laugh a lot, because we really do. And I mean, you just laugh at your foibles. They happen all the time, especially the older we get, huh? And the more forgetful. And you know how it is in ministry. Sometimes you're either laughing or you're crying, and laughing is better. Like Pearl Bailey said, I've been poor, I've been rich. Rich is better. I've been crying, I've been laughing. Laughing is better. Brittle people who don't laugh long don't last in ministry long. Yeah. So touchy people who take themselves too seriously, they're really impossible to live with, aren't they? Yeah. So maybe what we're saying here is take it easy. You know, God is in charge. It's not all up to us. God is in charge. So we probably all need to relax more. I wonder if we Christians really relaxed and enjoyed life and enjoyed each other, Christianity might look more appealing to those to whom we're trying to witness, if we're actually enjoying each other's company. And our marriages are built on gratitude and mutual enjoyment and just going the extra mile. Is it really that much? It's really that much, since we invest so much in our homes to try to be livable with and lovable. And less demanding. Yeah.
I was just thinking, sometimes the other side of gratitude is laughing not at a person, but laughing at someone's foibles. I remember there was a professor that at my first campus ministry that I just thought he was just so obnoxious. You know, he would come, he'd start talking right in your face, and about things you didn't. There's no dialogue, and I couldn't stand him, really, to tell you the truth. So I noticed that Bill didn't mind, and I said, how can you stand him? And he said, well, I see him as a big, lovable bear. So next time I looked at him, I thought, well, I guess you see a big, lovable bear is sort of humorous, you know. Sometimes that loving and laughing in an endearing sort of way or getting a positive image is helpful. And then number 15 is you need to be willing to talk about conflicting areas and mutually agreeable resolution. So we try to include in the book, Marriage at the Crossroads, some suggestions along that line. And some of the highlights was to seek Christ's peace when making important decisions. Try to please God in all you do. In other words, our mother-in-law told us when we got married, even though both of us were Americans, she said, you come from different cultures. Come from your different homes. You're going to find differences. Expect that you're going to have conflict. And the point is, it's just an indicator. You need to talk about something. You need to resolve it. So being conflict-free isn't the ideal. It's being able to realize you have conflict and be willing to talk about it. Listen to each other before you disagree. I mean, sometimes that is so hard. You know, you just want to complain or yell, but to pause a moment and then try to listen to each other. If you have a conflict, try to talk about it in the same day before you go to sleep so you don't build up resentment. I mean, that's not always possible, but when you can, the longer you wait, the worse it gets. And the longer you wait, the more you build up these facades of what the person is really doing. And sometimes you talk to them and it's just some really silly thing. And other times it might be something really key, but you don't know. You're always learning more about your spouse. Make plans, but be sensitive to God's redirection. And Ephesians 4:26 says, as you may know, be angry, but don't sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger, and don't make room for the devil. So it's assumed we're going to get angry. We're going to be filled with anger for something or other, but work on talking it over.
Yeah, the next one seems like such a no-brainer. but I notice so many people don't do this. Simply anticipate problems before they happen and avoid them. I actually tell this to my seminary students. I've been teaching seminary for about 30 years now. And I've just come every year, every class. I tell this to my students, especially the ones training to be pastors. I tell it to them over and over again. See the pit ahead. Don't fall in it. It's so hard to get out. And I especially apply this to adultery, an actual sin among pastors. Christians who fall may get restored, but the damage they do to their spouse, their kids, those who trusted them, it may be irreparable, no matter how hard they try. You can never patch up your ministry afterwards with all the people that you hurt when you do it. And it's certainly not worth the flashy testimony that you have afterwards, that you can share. The Christian life is supposed to be the normal life. It just goes on, and each day is supposed to look like the previous day, but you're getting deeper and deeper and closer to the Lord. We've done, as I said, I've done ministry for about 43 years, and I've realized that so much misery that we undergo, we create ourselves. Yeah. So the bottom line here is don't be an idiot. Why bring misery on yourself, right? There's so many pitfalls that are ahead of us in the home and when we live. We should anticipate them ahead of time and agree to head them off. It's not worth suffering unnecessarily because life throws so much at you. There's plenty of misery to go around. There really is. And every family gets their share of it. Sometimes cataclysmic miseries like the death of a child or a disease, a chronic disease that sets in, or an economic reversal that you didn't anticipate. There's plenty out there. Or something that happens to your extended family. You don't have to look for it. It comes. And you don't have to create it. The home is supposed to be the center of tranquility, where we refresh, not the front line of the battle.
So point 17, settle conflicts privately, not in public. Thinking of Matthew 18. And I think part of the thing is if you have a conflict with someone or disagreement, if you start dealing with it publicly, now you've got an audience. And then it makes resolution of it so much harder. And plus, the person may feel humiliated, embarrassed. You have all these additional things. So sometimes, wait, talk to the person privately, and they're a better place to resolve it.
Mm-hmm. And 18, remember mercy is given to you before you expect perfection from others. Go ahead and ask forgiveness when you're wrong. Also give it. Forgive your spouse as God forgave you. One of the courses I teach is theology of prayer. And I discovered in translating the two prayers that the Lord gave us. In Matthew 5:12, we actually assure God that we have forgiven before we ask for forgiveness. It's in the perfect tense, a past action that affects the present. In Luke 11:4, we assure God that we're in the process of forgiving. So it's actually going on now in order to be forgiven. What we see is you can't actually ask God for forgiveness, according to these two model prayers, if you don't forgive others. And it makes me think of that parable. Remember the parable Jesus told about the servant who was forgiven a lot and then didn't forgive a little? Remember how that ends? In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. That's Matthew 18. So these are wake-up calls. I mean, it's in our model prayer. It's in Jesus' parables. Better to err on the side of forgiveness. And all of us who've been married for any amount of time know that an I'm sorry, even when, you can't figure out why you should be sorry, especially for guys, An apology goes a long way. And then to receive something with, it's okay. Let's just forget it and move on. What these do is they keep the root of bitterness from taking hold. And then once that root grows and the plant's there, you can't even see the person on the other side for all the anger in between. 19, try not to retaliate an insult for an insult. Boy, that just escalates things. It's so easy to do, especially for a group of scholars like this, because we're so quick-minded, and we've taught to be so defensive in the scholarly world. But that has no place in the house. Number 20, try to speak to your spouse in a positive and a gentle and upbuilding rather than a rough and destructive way. Again, it's all in the way that we approach things. And that comes from the gratitude. See, these are all feeding into one another. If you're very grateful to your spouse, and you're appreciating your spouse, and you're making allowances for your spouse, and you're seeing everything as endearing, then your dialogue is going to be in a very respectful way. We taught our son from early on, please and thank you, to just phrase everything in that. He still does that now, as we do with one another. But that actually, it's not just words, it sets an attitude. Yeah.
So 21 is listen to your spouse's good advice. Don't be overly stubborn. And the passage is, fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to advice. I know my background part Spanish and Dutch. I think both heritages can be stubborn. But anyway, to pause and listen for good advice when you think you know it right, and then make your decision. And then 22, live according to your means, work hard so you can be generous with others. Don't cheat others, rather be thankful for what God has given you. And a passage for that is Ephesians 4:28. Thieves must give up stealing, rather let them labor and work honestly with their own hands so as to have something to share with the needy. And I think that's you think, what does money have to do with marriage? But often money problems are a major problem in marriages. And I know when my husband and I were masters in residence, when we noticed the tuition going up, the yelling would increase among all the seminary couples. And I sense sometimes you're really pushed to keep up with everyone else, with all the finances. And so Bill and I have worked really hard to try to figure out, what can we live at a simple way. And I think part of it is being good stewards, but also part of it, I think, affects your marriage. Then 23, don't use your child as a sounding board of your communication problems with your spouse. Don't make an ally of your kid against your spouse. Don't let your child divide you against each other. And looking here at Matthew 19:4-6, and there it says, Jesus answered, have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate. The reason I quote that is when you're married, your priority is first to your spouse, not to your former parents, and in a sense, not first priority to your children. And so you have to think of your spouse, first of all, and then you certainly don't want to have your poor child be stuck in the middle if you're arguing with each other. It's not fair to the child, and it's not good for your marriage.
Yes, we might add that these are things that we actually learn can predominate in cultures. We have a certain tension within American culture. Other cultures, this is even more pronounced. We have 3 responses from families from other cultures. And in the Asian chapter here in the marriage book, said in Asian culture, this is a very difficult thing because the loyalty is not to your spouse. The loyalty in the common knowledge is to your parents. And it often crushes the experience of, particularly of the wife, in that culture. And we discovered that too with the book that we did with Mimi. It says chapters from all over the world. What is it that impedes women's flourishing, women's ministry? For women and men to be able to truly work together. And it's often these cultural things like that that are built in and that we have to identify and then redeem, so as to say, to bring about a change. Oh, we're doing so fine. We're trying to get this done 10 minutes ahead of time so we could field in all of the comments that you want to make, or additions or subtractions or multiplications or anything you want to ask. So we just have 2 left to go. And these actually swing us full circle. And as you've noticed as we've gone through these, those of you who have counseled anybody, these are the things that have come up in your counseling. It's just a many, many year summary of everything we've had to grapple with. Number 24, remain faithful to each other. just as God is faithful to us. Maybe we should emblazon that up and stick it on all our refrigerators, huh? Just remain faithful to one another. That should be all familial creeds. And the final one is don't give up when things are hard. I think that takes us back to what my mom said originally, which was persevere, persevere. In fact, my mom said that so much that when she died, we actually put that on her gravestone. Persevering in Jesus. As she reminded me, you have to hold each other up because no other human is going to do this for you. And that's really been true. Aida and I have had to hold each other up through a lot of things, through life-threatening diseases and, very difficult ministries and all kinds of things. But there's nobody that holds you up and loves you like your own family. Marriage is the most intimate of relationships, and therefore it's built on the ideal. This is what we just told the waitress at our lunch there. When she said, we asked for the bill early, and she said, are you speaking? I said, yes, we are speaking. She said, what are you speaking on? I said, speaking on marriage. And she said, I'm 23, but my friends are all getting married. I'm thinking about it. And he said, oh. I whipped out the Priscilla papers. I said, we have a little thing, so we gave her that. And a lot of good advice. And one thing is, don't rush into it. A marriage that works is one where two independent people choose to become interdependent. And we could say on that, that kind of goal can only be achieved by working together because it takes both people full time to be jointly within the marriage and also protecting your marriage. And this is a thought I want to leave you. My wife protects me, and I protect my wife. Now that we're in our mature years, it's less difficult than when in the earlier years, but sometimes if you're being threatened, and we just had an excruciating experience in our presbytery, we're Presbyterian ministers, our leading evangelical just had to reveal that he had an extramarital relationship. This absolutely destroyed our leadership and a lot of our impact within the presbytery. The liberals were all sweet in helping him restore, but it just set us back so far. This went on for 2 years. He was pursued for 5 years by a woman he met teaching English as a second language. His wife was there to protect him. Just a word to her, I'm being pursued. Wives can take care of that, and husbands take care of that. So we do so. Our greatest line of defense, we protect each other. All right, is there. So protection of the marriage, joint responsibility, takes forethought and cooperation. The bottom line is to be daily committing to a lifelong covenant and persevering. Couples either deal effectively with conflict and they grow closer, despite life's adversities, or they grow apart. You really don't have a choice. You don't ever maintain a status quo. You're either getting closer or you're getting more distant. It's going to be one or the other. I want to grow closer. I imagine you all do too. That's why you came out to this particular session when there were so many other excellent ones to choose from. Well, how do we get empowered to do that? The Lord helps us do that. I mean, God is there. It was God's idea in the first place, and God has drawn us together, and God empowers us to do that. And that's why we soak this all in prayer. And when you both agree with God, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken, as it says in Ecclesiastes 4:12.
The assumption that many of the students had been given from their churches and their backgrounds is that somebody's got to be in charge, somebody's got to be where the buck stops, and that's always got to be the husband, because that's what the Bible says. You get the notion. And so the question to us was, when you have a disagreement, isn't there anarchy? How can you settle that and whatever?
I think what it is because there's one person supposedly in charge doesn't mean conflict ends. I mean, let's face, that's the first thing. First of all, how do they know they've made a wise decision? Or what often happens if you have a decision made, if everyone's not happy, then you have revolt behind the scene. And I think sometimes that would happen, I think in my parents' marriage, which was supposedly hierarchical, but in reality it wasn't. Sometimes there were revolts. One person, the husband might make a decision, but everyone's not pleased, and then you have like that subtle undermining of the other person, talking against them behind their back. I thought that's just a horrible situation. So or even sometime in institutions, if you have a person make a decision without the whole institution being in agreement, it doesn't work. So that's the first thing. I wonder whether that system really works. And that's my first question. So I think myself that decisions that are important need to be joint decisions anyway, no matter what you say your situation. That's why I said originally that that all marriages that really are working, if you look at it, it often is really mutual submission. So that's, you want to?
Sure. The other thing is, oh, and by the way, Jerry, you know, you're a professor. The reason why you write books is you can't remember all the stuff, so that's why we have to quote the page and look it up. That's why we have indexes, too, so we can remember things. One thing we notice about God is a God of superfluity. Yeah, I mean, we're just so efficient-driven in our culture. God is not. How long were the children of Israel suffering under slavery before God steps in? And then they wander around 40 years in the desert. There's countless stars in the sky that probably have no function at all from a human point of view. Thousands of flowers in the Amazon nobody's ever going to see. Why would we imagine that the God who is into such absolute excess of everything wants everything settled in our house within 10 minutes by some sort of mythical chain of command that's going to work? So with Aida and I, when we disagree, first of all, we just take our time. We take plenty of time. I mean, most of the time, the decisions we make are not going to change the course of the world. They may influence one or two little people, sort of a quote from Casablanca there, huh? But it's not going to really change the course of the world, but it will affect our lives and our relationship and our family. So we'll do all kinds of things. We make lists, positives and negatives. Often enough, as we talk things through, we'll switch positions. Then we have to convince each other on the other way around. And we really go, and if we can't settle it, we probably won't do it. Then we decided that worked so well, we would bring it over to our church. And one thing I didn't say at the donors banquet, when we were talking about what to do about your churches, we planted our church. So we had started with one church that got a new pastor and was not egalitarian. That was oppressive for our family. Then we went to another church, and theologically we just didn't fit. So we just planted our own church. And most of the people in our church, it's a storefront. Most of them have come to faith in our church. All they know about Christianity is what they learned in our church. So they assume it's egalitarian. They don't know any other model. They've never been to church before. So we decided to move the model of consensus over. So our elders work with consensus too. And we'll take the time that it takes till every elder on the board agrees. And sure, it's wasteful. It's wasteful for getting things done. But then, church is all about relationship, isn't it? I mean, isn't evangelism, it was a love relationship in the Trinity that got extended to earth, and then we got networked into that, and then it went down through the ages until it came to us? And so isn't that what church is supposed to be? It's supposed to be continuing the love relationship that was in the Trinity, and then networking people, and then reaching out. And what evangelism is inviting more people into that love relationship. So we found that when you work by consensus, and then you bring the congregation and hear it all and move, you may not accomplish a lot of things, but you really build relationships. And isn't that what church growth is really about? People growing in all the virtues and in the relationships. So that's pretty much how we do it. A very wasteful but healing process.
Time for another question? And then
one of your points you mentioned, like working out your roles and making them as clear as possible. Can you maybe flesh out or give some examples about how you guys went about that?
well, let's say, I think when we're first married, okay, we have household duties to do. Like, who's going to cook when, who's going to clean the toilets, who's going to vacuum, who's going to dust, because we wanted to share things. So first of all, Bill got in charge of the morning breakfast because I didn't wake up. So that was an easy decision. He woke up first, and I was just sleeping away. He got hungrier and hungrier, so he just went and started making breakfast. So it would be ready when I finally woke up.
I'm still doing it.
Yeah. So that was decided that way. And so then what it is then we said, okay, we wanted to share things, and we both wanted to cook. So we decided, well, the evening meal, I think, how did I get that? Was it just because it's more elaborate meal, or
No, it's just, it fell to you by default.
is it why you had lunch too?
I did breakfast and lunch. It was just easy to set them up together. And
I
left
see.
you with supper, so you didn't
Okay.
sandbag them in the night.
Okay, well, there we go. That's how we decided to divide that up. And normally, that's what we do. So we don't wonder who's going to cook this meal or that. We'll just assume that, unless, for example, something comes up, I can't cook a meal, and then I'll ask, Bill, you want to do this? Or he'll ask me, and then we'll switch. But so we don't have to, once we made a decision, we have to think about it. And then I think originally what we used to do is we would, like, we lived actually in community with seminary students, and we would have a list, and we would be constantly changing who did the different household duties, and there it was constantly changing who cooked it at night. So now that we're not living in community, I think we pretty much decided, I think I ended up dusting and vacuuming because Bill's allergic to dust. So unless I'm sick, you know, I don't have that problem with the breathing. So I was the dusting and vacuuming person. And then we just would always clean on the same night, which still is Thursday night after all these years, because that way we'd do it together. And then what ends up is Bill then does the picking up. And, you know, sometimes picking up can be a major job. So he'll be picking up sometimes before Thursday night and getting ready for me to dust and to vacuum. And then plus that way is I want to give him loads of time to pick up, because sometimes Bill spreads everything out when he's going to study, and this way he can pick that up and pick everything up. And then I just focus on the dusting, the vacuuming, and then the mopping. Because mopping is sort of fun, you know, sort of the, I don't mind mopping. But you know, if I'm sick, if I have a cold, then he'll do the dusting and vacuuming, so I won't inhale the dust. And then I will just do pickup and mopping. What?
You like to shop? You shop?
Okay, yeah, I'd like to shop. And then what it is what we found out is that I was doing the shopping and I was doing the clothes, and then Bill read some material, and I was reading that women end up even doing more household duties than the men, and he felt bad, and then now you're stuck with all the cleaning of clothes.
It works out. Yeah, this works out great. I hate to shop. It's so much easier to do the clothes. So I've been doing them for years, and I have it down to a technique now. Just like dishes, we have our own theory of how to do dishes. We can do them like that. You know, it's you get skills just like anything else.
So whoever cooks does not do the dishes. So we don't even think about it. If he cooks breakfast, I go right and do the dishes. If I cook dinner, then he goes right and does the dishes for that. So we just trade off.
Yeah, and then we just extend it over to the church. You know, the way we do the church, it's by whatever our affinities are and what our spiritual gifts are. And we're able to plant the church with doing that. Aida's skills are different from mine.
Now, how does our spiritual gifts affect your marriage?
Oh, geez, we're out of time. Aida's center-brained. So she draws from both the right and the left brain. She's very organizational. Before she became a New Testament scholar, she was a community organizer. So whenever we want to organize anything, she does all the finances, does all the organizational stuff, talks to anybody we don't know. I am a classic S. I'm very relational, although left to myself, I'm actually reclusive. So when during the day, I'm just working on all the scholarly things because I was an only child and used to being by myself. But for public, because I'm an S, I'm cursed with the curse of the S's. Those of you who know what that is. It's like 80 to 90% our intuitive guesses are correct. And so therefore we assume that the other 20 to 0% are all right too. So that's where we get in trouble. But normally we can just pretty much psych out the situation. So therefore I work with everybody we know. So when it comes to a person we know, I usually can build a relational aspect there.
Like a sticky situation.
Yeah.
If there's a sticky situation of someone that we know well, we just, okay, Bill, this is you.
Yeah, we even do that with Priscilla papers, just to show you how it goes over to ministry. I have Deb Mel do all the acceptances. I will do all the rejections. which I spend a lot of time on, very carefully. So if you get a letter from me, brace up. But usually I try to salvage out as much as I can do. So really, the things you discover in the home, it's just to say, the things you discover in the home are actually probably your spiritual gift, the orientation that the Lord gave you, and they'll work out in ministry, in your occupation, and any place else out in life. And discovering these gifts, you really can implement them in marriage, and tasks often come from the gifts you have.